It's actually difficult a little bit because I was born in Afghanistan. I was probably 2 years old, probably not, maybe even less than that probably, when my parents fled because of the Soviet invasion. And I grew up a little bit in Pakistan, so I remember going to, I think, up to third grade in Pakistan. And I've lived most of my life here in Atlanta, Georgia. Not here, but in Atlanta in the United States. So I've grown up most of my life here. But Pakistan, I did grow up in there, and we lived in a very small house, probably the back skirts, or the outskirts, sorry, the outskirts of Peshawar. That's where we lived, and my parents and my brothers, which three brothers and myself, we all slept in one room, which was also a living room and a dining room and everything. And actually, when my parents first came to Pakistan, and I was a very little child, they had to live in that one room with, I think, 2 or 3 families, so it was packed in there as well. And I think one of the greatest things I remember, not the greatest things, but one of the strongest memories of Pakistan is the heat. It was very hot in there. And sometimes during the afternoons when the sun would go down, my mom would throw water onto we had a small courtyard as well, very small. And she would throw water on that, and my brothers and I would play in there as well. So I remember that. That's very vivid. In Atlanta, I think the biggest shock for me was the fact that there were more rooms in an apartment, and we didn't call it apartments. I didn't even know what that was, and obviously because I wasn't speaking English at the time either. But in Atlanta, we had more rooms, but still my brothers and I shared one room for quite a long time until we started growing up and we moved. I think one of the things that I remember best about my childhood in Atlanta is the fact that there were school buses. You couldn't walk to the supermarket as you could in in Pakistan, where my dad also had a store. He was a tailor, and so we would go to his store sometimes and just hang out, my brothers and I. But in Atlanta, Georgia, that wasn't possible. So we had to find ways of getting there. A lot of times we just walked because we didn't have transportation. We were so much used to walking places, so we just walked there. So that's some of the things I really remember that stay with me, and I actually enjoy those memories. I grew up in Clarkston, and that's I think a haven for most refugee families that come in. A lot of them are put in there, so it's full of refugees. There are very few, I suppose you can say, native families, American families. It's a very, I would say it's a little bit underdeveloped. It's not as well developed as some of the other towns, but then it's not run by what I would call Americans. It's probably run by probably refugees as well. Educated refugees, not the same refugees that usually just come in, obviously, but that it's a small town. I think there's 1 or 2 soccer fields there. It's very small markets, supermarkets. Not what I would imagine a lot of towns are like. I had never heard of what African Americans were. I didn't know that there was such a people as who had black skin. It's shocking. I think I never met anyone who wasn't an Afghan. Very few Pakistanis, even in Peshawar, and that's because we lived in a very small part of Peshawar, which was called Afghan Colony. So there were a lot of Afghans there, and I grew up with we even went to an Afghan school. And I think my parents were very conscious of making sure that we were around our own people. And this is something that is true of most people, I think, in the Middle East or even in Africa as well. That people tend to be around their own type. They don't want to, mix with other people. So when I came to Clarkston, the fact that I was meeting people of different races and I had to speak English. I couldn't speak Persian or Dari, which I did, which was the official language. And so I think that was probably beneficial for me because as I grew up, I learned to speak English better. And so I speak as well today because I was around people I was forced to speak English with them. And my soccer coach made it a rule never to speak your own language. Whatever you do, you have to speak English. And so through that, I think I learned it. That's one of the benefits of being around people of different races, although we use the same language. But I think it was a good experience as well. I know some of my parents, some of their thoughts are very, racist sometimes. So I think being exposed to that helped me get through that. So I never really faced the same challenges that my parents probably did, because they weren't forced to speak English all the time, and I was. So I think that was something I got out of that.